The quiet sea's secret. The Black Sea today lies still and vast, its dark waters stretching beneath a wide sky, bordered by coastlines where gulls wheel and ships carve white wakes across the surface. To the casual eye, it is a familiar sea, one of the inland bodies that separate Europe from Asia. Yet to scientists, storytellers, and archaeologists, it is far more than that. It is a place layered with memory, where every ripple hides echoes of forgotten lives. The Black Sea is not simply water. It is a library without shelves, an archive without ink, holding beneath its surface the traces of entire landscapes and civilizations. For centuries, people have whispered of what might rest below. Sailors spoke of the sea's unusual stillness, of its eerie ability to preserve wood longer than almost anywhere else. Local fishers muttered about hauling up strange timbers in their nets, water darkened yet carved by human hands. Such tales were long dismissed as folklore, but they carried the flavour of truth. Modern science has begun to suggest that the quiet sea may indeed guard secrets of extraordinary scale. One fact stands firm in mainstream scholarship. The Black Sea was not always as it appears now. Around 5600 BCE, it may have been a vast freshwater lake, its shoreline hundreds of feet lower than today's. The fertile valleys that ringed it could have supported thousands of people, early farmers and fishers who planted wheat, herded animals, and lived in villages along the rivers that emptied into the lake. If so, the ground beneath the current waves once echoed with laughter, ritual, and the ring of stone against stone. Yet alongside these grounded truths, there lingers a more fringe tidbit, one whispered beyond academic circles. Some enthusiasts claim the Black Sea holds an ancient metropolis, a city with walls and avenues hidden like an aquatic Pompeii. They point to anomalies to tales of divers glimpsing unnatural blocks deep below. Most archaeologists remain cautious, but such claims, however unproven, add an air of mythic wonder to the sea's reputation. Scholars still debate whether this body of water truly conceals a single lost civilization, or simply the remnants of scattered farming villages drowned by rising tides. Was it a coherent culture, with its own rituals and identity, or a patchwork of small communities swept away by chance? The distinction matters, for the story we tell of the Black Sea is not only about geology, it is about humanity, about whether we once thrived together on lands now silent beneath the waves. As we begin this journey, we imagine standing on a quiet modern shore, the air cool with salt and the scent of kelp. Waves lap steadily, concealing what once was. Somewhere far below, beneath layers of silt and centuries of still water, lie the faint imprints of hearths, pathways, perhaps even temples. The Black Sea, calm on the surface, may be one of the most dramatic stage sets in prehistory, a place where an entire chapter of human experience was swallowed, yet not forgotten. This first step is only a whisper, an opening of the curtain. The sea remains patient, withholding its stories, inviting us to descend carefully, to listen, for in its silence lies both loss and revelation, waiting for us to trace the outlines of a civilization drowned but not erased, echo of the drowned valley. Beneath the surface of the Black Sea lies a hidden landscape, as though a painter's canvas had been rolled up and stored away, unseen for thousands of years. Sonar imaging and sediment cores hint that before salt water swept across it, the basin was home to sweeping valleys, winding riverbeds, and fertile plains. Imagine, for a moment, gazing down through the water as if the waves were glass. You would not see endless monotony, but the ghost of a drowned countryside, fields where wheat once bent in the wind, pathways where herders guided animals toward rivers that no longer exist. This is the echo of the drowned valley. One solid anchor in mainstream research comes from the work of marine geologists William Ryan and Walter Pittman in the 1990s. They proposed that the Black Sea had once been a freshwater lake, isolated and lower than the world's oceans. According to their evidence, around 5600 BCE, a catastrophic breach occurred when rising Mediterranean waters surged through what is now the Bosporus Strait. The flood, they argued, was immense, several hundred times the volume of Niagara Falls, rushing in and drowning the valley in a matter of months, if not weeks. The idea of entire valleys submerged in such haste captured the imagination of both scholars and the public alike. But alongside these measured findings exists something more unusual. Some divers claim to have glimpsed regular stone patterns beneath the waves, as though the drowned valley had not only farms and hamlets, but also engineered walls or foundations. These reports are often fragmentary, shared over tavern tables or tucked into obscure newsletters. Skeptics suggest such formations are natural rock outcrops, yet the persistence of these claims adds an uncanny shimmer to the Black Sea's story. They imply that perhaps the drowned valleys are not just natural features, but remnants of human intention. Scholars still debate whether the flood was truly catastrophic or more gradual. Some argue for a sudden, terrifying surge that would have forced whole populations to abandon their homes within days. Others believe the rise was slow, stretching across centuries, allowing communities time to adapt and migrate. The truth remains hidden in sediments and isotopes, waiting for future dives to reveal whether the valleys below were lost in a cataclysm or surrendered slowly, like a candle burning down. To picture this landscape before its drowning is to imagine a world both familiar and alien. Farmers likely tended emmer wheat and barley, crops later known across the Fertile Crescent. Families may have constructed houses of wattle and daub, clustered near freshwater streams. Herds of goats and cattle grazed on open grassland, while fishers plied the rivers that once cut through the valleys, catching sturgeon and carp. Children would have played along muddy banks, chasing each other with reeds. And all of this, every path, every fire pit, now lies beneath hundreds of feet of dark, still water. If we think of modern valleys like the Danube Plain, green and wide, we can begin to picture what the Black Sea basin might once have looked like. The contrast is startling. What is now an abyss of water, lifeless in its deeper layers, was once a living stage, crowded with human voices. That knowledge casts a shadow across the waves, for the drowned valleys are not only geological curiosities, they are places where human history itself was reshaped. And so the echo lingers. It hums in the sediment cores extracted by scientists, in the shells that tell stories of shifting salinity, and in the whispered claims of divers who swear they saw something carved, something deliberate, on the seafloor. The drowned valley beneath the Black Sea is a reminder that landscapes vanish but never entirely disappear. They remain as echoes, calling us to listen harder, to dive deeper, and to seek the people whose lives once unfolded where water now reigns. The Great Breach. On a summer's day some 7,500 years ago, the world shifted for the people living around the ancient Black Sea basin. Imagine the scene. Shepherds guiding flocks along grassy slopes, farmers bending to cut wheat, and children splashing in shallow streams. Then, one morning, a dull roar grew from the west, a sound unlike any thunder or storm they had ever heard. The Mediterranean, swollen by melting glaciers and rising seas, had finally found a crack in the limestone ridge we now call the Bosporus. Through that narrow gate, salt water surged in a torrent that dwarfed any river. This was the Great Breach, the moment when a lake became a sea. The geological evidence for such an event is striking. Sediment cores show an abrupt shift in salinity around 5600 BCE, a clear boundary between freshwater mollusks and their saltwater cousins. Above that line, oysters and clams appear, creatures of the Mediterranean, marking the moment when the sea invaded. Ryan and Pittman's calculations suggested the water may have risen as fast as 15 centimetres a day. Over weeks, low-lying villages would have been inundated, their hearths drowned, their fields swallowed whole. It was not a storm that could be waited out. It was the land itself disappearing. In the realm of fringe fascination, some enthusiasts describe the breach as apocalyptic. They imagine a wave so immense that it thundered across the basin, sweeping away people in a single day. Popular accounts have called it a flood of biblical proportions, a phrase that has clung stubbornly to the theory. Some storytellers even insist survivors were forced to build boats, carrying with them seeds and animals, an image suspiciously familiar from later religious tales. While archaeology offers no direct proof of such dramatic escapes, the persistence of these ideas reveals how deeply the notion of a sudden deluge resonates with us. Scholars still debate whether the Great Breach was indeed catastrophic or more gradual. Some argue the erosion of the Bosporus could have taken years, perhaps decades, with salt water trickling slowly before becoming a rush. Others maintain that the geological scars point to a violent torrent. Both camps agree on one thing: the breach forever altered the ecology, geography, and cultures of the region. But how quickly it happened, and how desperate the human response might have been, remains unresolved. To grasp the scale, we can compare it to our modern world. Imagine the Hoover Dam breaking, unleashing Lake Mead into the desert below. Multiply that force many times, and stretch it across weeks. For the farmers who watched water creep closer each sunrise, the breach must have felt like the slow arrival of the end of the world. For those caught unawares by a sudden surge, it was terror, chaos, and flight. What remains haunting is how this event may have rippled far beyond its shore. If the breach drove survivors into migration, they could have carried not only tools and seeds, but also memories. Traumas of displacement, stories of water rising without mercy, may have seeded the flood myths that later blossomed in Mesopotamia and Greece. Whether sudden or slow, the breach was not merely geological, it was cultural, a shaper of stories that echo still. Today, standing on the shores of the Bosporus, we can almost hear it. The strait is busy with ships and ferries, yet beneath the engines lingers an older sound, the roar of water pouring through day after day until the lake was no more. It is humbling to imagine that one narrow channel, a simple breach in stone, transformed not just a landscape, but perhaps even the myths by which humanity makes sense of its past. Fireside before the flood, long before the waters came, before the roar of the Bosporus and the drowning of valleys, life along the shores of the ancient Black Sea was ordinary, steady, and deeply human. We might picture it like a quiet evening in a Neolithic village. Smoke curls upward from clay hearths, families gather around the fire, breaking bread baked from emmer wheat, children gnaw roasted fish pulled from nearby rivers. The air smells of smoke, grass, and damp earth, and beyond the huts, fields ripple in the wind. It is a world unaware of its coming transformation, caught in the delicate balance between land and water. Archaeological evidence grounds us here. In sites around the Black Sea Basin, places like the lower Danube and Anatolia, researchers have uncovered remnants of early farming life. Stone sickles used to harvest grain, charred seeds showing crops cultivated, and pottery decorated with simple incised patterns. These people lived in semi-permanent villages, combining farming with fishing and herding. Their homes were modest, wattle and daub walls, thatched roofs, hearths at the centre. Yet, within these simple spaces, complex lives unfolded. They told stories, performed rituals, and managed the seasonal rhythms of planting and harvest. And tucked in the corners of excavation pits, we sometimes find something stranger. At one site near the basin, archaeologists uncovered a clay figurine of a seated woman with exaggerated features. Was she a fertility symbol, a household goddess, or merely a child's toy? Fringe interpretations go further, suggesting these figures point to a vanished Black Sea cult, a ritual system swept away by the flood. Such theories stretch the evidence, but they remind us that the firesides of pre-flood communities were not merely practical spaces. They were places of meaning, belief, and perhaps even worship. Scholars still debar to whether the families who lived here sensed what was coming. Did they notice the rivers rising, the soil growing wetter, the fish moving in unfamiliar ways, or did the flood arrive so quickly that awareness was useless, their fires extinguished in days? Some argue that oral traditions may have preserved warnings passed down in fragments across generations. Others suggest that these people lived too close to survival's edge to imagine such a transformation. Their focus was on tending goats, baking bread, raising children, not on contemplating cataclysm. It is tempting to imagine one particular night. A family sits together, a father sharpening a stone axe, a mother kneading dough, the flicker of flames dancing on walls painted with ochre designs. The children chase each other until scolded to sit still. Outside, the sound of frogs hums from the marsh. The stars shine overhead, bright in a sky unpolluted by smoke or city lights. It feels eternal, as though tomorrow will be just the same. Yet history tells us it would not last. The waters were already pressing at the Bosporus, already gathering to pour across their world. The poignancy of this vision lies not only in the flood to come, but in the ordinariness of the life that preceded it. These were people like us, hopeful, resourceful, concerned with harvests and families. Their evenings by the fire, their shared meals, their laughter, these are moments that vanish from the archaeological record, but they remain real. The Great Flood has often been cast in myth as divine punishment or cosmic renewal. But before it was either of those, it was simply loss, a hearth gone cold, a valley turned to sea, a community erased. And so the fireside before the flood lingers in our imagination. It reminds us that beneath the grandeur of geology and myth are the smallest of human details, bread baking in clay ovens, songs sung softly, to children the warmth of firelight against the night, all of it carried away by the rising tide, leaving us only shards and whispers to reconstruct the world that was fragments in the silt. When archaeologists sift through the Black Sea's coastal soils and dredged sediments, they find not cities with walls or temples of stone, but something humbler, broken pieces of lives, shards of pottery, tools chipped from flint, bones of animals once herded and consumed. These fragments, scattered and fragile, are the breadcrumbs left by a people whose homes now lie beneath water. In the silt, the story is not written in grand monuments, but in the everyday objects that anchored existence. Mainstream archaeology offers us a steady picture here. Sites along the former shoreline reveal hand-shaped clay pots, some decorated with rippling incised lines that might represent waves or rivers. Stone sickles, worn smooth by repeated harvests, suggest that farming was central to these communities. In some places, hearth remains contain charred grains of emmer wheat and barley, direct evidence of meals cooked thousands of years ago. Taken together, these fragments paint a picture of a people firmly settled, not nomads, but cultivators, experimenting with permanence in a world that would prove anything but permanent. Yet among these ordinary finds, there are stranger notes. Divers and fishermen alike have occasionally reported pulling up unusual objects, stones that seem worked, timbers oddly squared, even what some insist were fragments of paved surfaces. Most mainstream scholars advise caution. Waves and mud can reshape materials in misleading ways. Still, the image of a lost paved street, buried beneath layers of silt, has an undeniable allure. Fringe voices seize on such hints, suggesting that what lies hidden is not simply villages, but perhaps the foundations of a forgotten complex society. Scholars still debate whether these scattered fragments represent a coherent culture unique to the Black Sea, or merely outposts of broader Neolithic networks, stretching from Anatolia to the Balkans. Was there a distinctive Black Sea people with their own customs and beliefs, or were they simply part of a wider web of farming communities experimenting with the same tools and rituals? The pottery styles suggest both local invention and outside influence, leaving the question suspended between clarity and mystery. If we hold one of these shards in our mind's eye, the picture sharpens. A hand-formed pot, clay dug from a nearby bank, shaped by palm and thumb, dried by the sun, and hardened in a low fire. Its surface bears faint lines, fingerprints perhaps, or the mark of a tool dragged across wet clay. Once, this vessel held stew, or water, or fermented drink. Once, it was lifted to lips, passed around a hearth, and then it broke, discarded or lost, only to be rediscovered by strangers thousands of years later. It is not a monument, but it is a voice. The sea has preserved some of these fragments with eerie perfection, because the deeper waters of the Black Sea are almost entirely devoid of oxygen. Organic materials like wood or bone endure far longer than elsewhere. This unique chemistry means that beneath the silt we may one day find artifacts not just of stone and clay, but of wood, textiles, even rope. The fragments in the silt are not only what we have, they are what is waiting for us. Standing today at the edge of the Black Sea, it is humbling to imagine that beneath the waves lies a museum without walls. Every shard, every flake of stone, every charred seed is part of a story too vast to grasp all at once. But in their accumulation, these fragments remind us of the fragility of human endeavour. Civilizations rise not only in marble and gold, but in clay pots and wooden beams, and it is often these humblest materials that outlast us, whispering from the silt crossroads of early worlds. The Black Sea Basin was never a quiet backwater. Long before the flood, even before the breach of the Bosporus, it was a place where rivers and paths converged, where cultures brushed shoulders and exchanged ideas. Its rivers, the Danube, the Dniester, the Dnieper, and the Don, were ancient highways, carrying traders, migrants, and perhaps even storytellers. To live here was to dwell at a crossroads, a liminal zone between the steppes of the north, the mountains of Anatolia, and the fertile lands of the Near East. Mainstream archaeology has shown this through the spread of technology and goods. Obsidian from Anatolia, prized for its sharpness, appears far from its volcanic sources, carried by networks of trade that stretched across hundreds of kilometres. Decorative styles in pottery reveal influences from both the Balkan cultures to the west and the agricultural societies of Mesopotamia to the south. The basin was not isolated. It was stitched into a tapestry of early farming societies experimenting with tools, crops, and social systems. And yet a fringe idea lingers at the edges of this picture, that the Black Sea was not merely a crossroads, but perhaps the cradle of something greater, a fountainhead of Indo-European languages themselves. A minority of scholars and enthusiasts suggest that the upheaval of the flood drove these proto-speakers outward, scattering their words and myths into Europe and Asia alike. If true, the basin was not just a meeting place, but the epicenter of one of humanity's greatest linguistic legacies. Most linguists remain cautious, pointing instead to the Pontic-Caspian steppe as the more likely homeland. Still, the allure of placing such origins beneath the Black Sea has not disappeared. Scholars still debate whether the basin's communities were robust enough to act as a hub, or whether they were simply periphery, rail outposts of larger cultural centres in Anatolia and Mesopotamia. Did the rivers funnel trade and migration here naturally, or do we exaggerate the region's role because its later history, as a contested frontier of empires, makes us assume it must always have been important? The truth may lie somewhere in between, a mosaic of communities, each tied outward by rivers, connected more than they perhaps realised. Imagine a traveller along the Dniester 5,000 years ago. He carries a sack of obsidian blades, polished until they gleam. He arrives at a settlement where women are firing clay vessels in open kilns, and he offers his blades in exchange for a set of pots. As night falls, he joins the villagers by their fire, listening to songs in a dialect not quite his own, yet familiar enough that trade and laughter bridge the gaps. The next morning he sets out again, walking toward the sea, toward another community, another tongue. This was the rhythm of the crossroads: movement, exchange, adaptation. The Black Sea's position made it a cultural hinge. To the north lay the grasslands where horses would later be tamed. To the south, the great agricultural centres of the Fertile Crescent. To the west, the Balkan Mountains with their copper mines, the beginnings of metallurgy. Each direction offered something new, and the basin absorbed these influences like a sponge. Even today, the region bears the marks of a crossroads, a place where boundaries blur and histories overlap. And so, beneath the waves, we are not merely looking for lost villages. We are searching for the traces of meetings, of borrowed words, of exchanged goods and mingled rituals. The basin may have been drowned, but its role as a crossroads echoes still. In the languages we speak, the myths we tell, and the very idea that human cultures are strongest not in isolation, but in contact. Myths flow like rivers. As waters reshaped the Black Sea, memories reshaped themselves into stories. Across the ancient world, flood myths appear like rivers flowing from different sources, but joining in one mighty current. In Mesopotamia, the Epic of Gilgamesh tells of Utnapishtim, a man warned by the gods to build a vessel before the deluge. In Greece, Deucalion and Pyrrha survive Zeus's flood by fashioning a chest. Farther east, Indian texts describe Manu, who is saved by a great fish guiding him to safety. The myths are many, yet the refrain is the same. Water rises, the world drowns, and a remnant survives to begin anew. The mainstream fact that anchors us is this: flood myths are nearly universal. Anthropologists have catalogued them from every inhabited continent, but they cluster with striking density around regions near great rivers and seas. Scholars note the parallels between these tales and the geological evidence for floods like the Black Sea breach, where entire communities were displaced by waters advancing over familiar ground. It is not hard to imagine survivors recounting their ordeal generation after generation until the memory hardened into myth. But the fringe embellishments are irresistible. Some storytellers claim that all flood myths stem from one single disaster, the Black Sea deluge itself. In their vision, survivors scattered in every direction, carrying not only crops and tools, but a singular story of the flood, which later blossomed into countless local variants. From the Tigris to the Nile, from the Aegean to the Indus, they see one shared route. This notion has great narrative power, though most scholars caution against reducing the world's mythologies to one event. Still, the idea persists like a shadow on the water. Scholars still debate whether these myths are historical memories of actual floods or archetypal expressions of human anxiety about water and chaos. Are they records of lived catastrophe, or do they reflect universal human fears projected into story form whenever rivers swelled and storms raged? The Black Sea flood provides a tempting candidate, But myths are slippery things, shifting like the currents they describe. Imagine a child sitting by a fire centuries after the breach. An elder leans close, voice low and solemn. Once, the sea was a field. Our ancestors lived there, and the waters came. They came and did not stop until only the hills were dry. The child listens wide-eyed, clutching a clay figurine. This story is not mere entertainment. It is a warning, a preservation of memory. Over time, the child's grandchildren might repeat it with new names, new gods, but the heart of it remains. The world can drown. Flood myths flow like rivers because they carry more than facts. They carry grief, resilience, and wonder. They remind us that water is both giver and taker of life. For those who lived around the ancient Black Sea, water was sustenance, a path for fish and trade. Yet in one generation, it became a force of loss, erasing hearths and fields. How could such an event not echo in story, shaping the imagination of countless cultures to come? Standing at the water's edge today, one can almost hear those ancient stories mingling with the surf. The myths, like rivers, continue to flow, each one a current of memory, joining together in the great sea of human storytelling. Whether born of one flood or many, they remind us of our shared vulnerability to forces beyond our control, and of our ability to make meaning in the face of loss. Ancestral voices. Across millennia, myths rarely travel alone. They move like caravans, reshaped and reinterpreted, yet carrying echoes of their origins. When scholars place the Black Sea flood against the backdrop of ancient literature, the resonance becomes uncanny. Could the voices of survivors, displaced by rising tides, have carried their memories into the earliest stories of humanity, echoes that would later crystallize into the epics of Gilgamesh, Noah, and beyond? The solid ground of mainstream fact is found in Mesopotamia. The oldest known flood narrative, preserved on clay tablets, is the tale of Utnapishtim in the Epic of Gilgamesh. There, gods unleash a deluge to wipe out humankind, but one man is warned, builds a vessel, and survives with family and animals. Centuries later, in the Hebrew Bible, Noah's Ark retells the same motif: a chosen man, a boat, a preservation of life. These narratives, separated by time and culture, nevertheless share striking details. The possibility that both arose from cultural memory of earlier floods, perhaps even one centered around the Black Sea, remains an enticing hypothesis. Yet on the fringes, bolder claims emerge. Some enthusiasts argue that these myths are not merely parallel, but direct retellings of a single disaster, the inundation of the Black Sea basin. In their telling, survivors fled south into Mesopotamia, carrying the story that would become Utnapishtim's tale, and west into the Levant, planting the seeds of Noah's legend. Over centuries, these ancestral voices were transmuted into sacred texts. To them, the Black Sea is not just a regional flood, it is the primal event behind humanity's most enduring spiritual stories. Scholars still debate whether such connections are plausible. Many argue that floods were common across the Fertile Crescent. The Tigris and Euphrates alone could produce cataclysms devastating on, or to inspire myths. Others emphasize the archetypal nature of flood stories. They emerge wherever people depend on rivers and seas. The Black Sea flood may have inspired some strands, but it is equally possible that the parallels are coincidental, shaped by the universal human experience of water's dual nature, life-giving and life-destroying. Still, it is difficult to dismiss the power of oral tradition. Anthropologists note that oral cultures can preserve memories of natural events for astonishing lengths of time, sometimes thousands of years. Could families displaced by the Black Sea flood have passed down their story across generations, reshaped by each retelling, until it found its way into clay tablets and scripture? Imagine a line of storytellers stretching back into prehistory, each voice slightly altering the narrative, but keeping the kernel alive. The waters came, and we endured. Let us picture one such voice. A woman, carrying her child away from a drowning valley, speaks to comfort the little one. Long ago, when our people faced the rising water, the Great Spirit told us to build a boat. We brought the seeds, the animals, the songs, and when the flood ended, we began again. Her child, soothed, grows up and repeats the story, adding details, changing God's names, embellishing the ordeal. By the time the tale reaches distant lands, it has become myth, but at its heart still beats a memory of survival. Ancestral voices murmur beneath the Black Sea's waves. They remind us that myth and memory often intertwine, that stories may be less about fact than about meaning. Whether Noah's Ark and Gilgamesh's vessel trace back to this particular flood may never be proven. Yet the possibility itself adds a haunting dimension, that our most sacred narratives, the stories that shaped civilizations, might carry within them the whispers of families once gathered on a shars, or watching the waters rise, gods beneath the waves. If the Black Sea flood left villages and farms drowned beneath its waters, what else might it have swallowed? For centuries, speculation has swirled around the idea that shrines, idols, and sacred places, sites of prayer and ritual, now rest in silence on the seafloor. To imagine gods beneath the waves is to imagine that faith itself was submerged, carried into darkness, along with hearths and homes. Archaeological fact gives us a starting point. Across the Neolithic and Chalcolithic world, ritual was woven into daily life. Figurines of clay and stone, often depicting exaggerated human forms, have been uncovered from sites near the Black Sea basin. Symbols scholars interpret as fertility icons, ancestral spirits, or household deities. Altars with traces of ash suggest offerings burned to unseen powers. While we have no direct evidence of temples beneath the Black Sea, it is reasonable to assume that ritual spaces once existed in villages now drowned. Religion, after all, is as old as fear and hope, and both would have flourished in a fertile valley. At the fringe of possibility lie far bolder claims. Some divers, in obscure reports, describe glimpses of stone blocks aligned in strange patterns, suggesting walls or platforms. Fringe writers leap to interpret these as the remains of sanctuaries, even temples to forgotten gods. Comparisons are drawn to Atlantis, to submerged stone circles, to sacred architecture swallowed by seas. Without verifiable evidence, such claims remain tantalizing but unconfirmed. Yet their persistence speaks to our yearning. We do not only want to find homes in the deep, we want to find sacredness. Scholars still debate how early ritual spaces should be understood. Were they community shrines built to unite neighbours in shared rites? Were they domestic, humble offerings made at hearths? Or were they something more formal, proto-temples hinting at institutions yet to come? The ambiguity is part of the puzzle. We know these people revered forces larger than themselves, but whether they built for their gods in stone or simply in gesture and fire is unresolved. Picture a riverside settlement before the flood. At its centre stands a low platform of packed clay, where villagers gather during harvest to thank the spirits. On it they leave offerings, grain, bones, the figurine of a mother goddess. Smoke rises as songs are chanted, rhythmic and steady, the voices carrying across the valley. Children watch, eyes wide, learning the rituals that knit community together. For those who fled the rising waters, abandoning such sacred places may have been as painful as leaving their homes. To lose a shrine is to lose the centre of meaning. And so we wonder, what relics of that faith might rest beneath the waves? A figurine lying in silt, a platform covered in mussels, a sacred fire pit long extinguished. In the imagination, they become cathedrals beneath the sea, though reality is likely simpler. Still, the idea that prayers and chants once rose from ground, now drowned, lends the Black Sea a haunting aura. It is not only a graveyard of villages, but potentially a cemetery of gods. The thought stirs something universal, for across cultures, sacred sites are often tied to land, mountains, rivers, groves. When land itself disappears, does the sacred vanish with it, or does it transform into story? The Black Sea offers no answers, only silence. But in that silence, one can almost hear the echoes of ritual, of communities lifting their voices to deities whose altars now lie beneath a vast, unbroken surface of water. The Fisherman's Hall. For generations, the Black Sea's mysteries have not belonged only to scientists in submarines or archaeologists with sonar. They have belonged first and foremost to the fishermen who work its waters. Long before sonar scans and robotic dives, men in weathered boats cast their nets, not expecting to haul up history, yet sometimes doing just that. In their stories, preserved like salt-dried fish, we hear faint clues of what might lie below. The factual record includes several reports of unusual catches. In the mid-20th century, local fishermen along the Bulgarian and Turkish coasts spoke of hauling up squared timbers, water darkened but intact, their edges too precise to be mistaken for driftwood. Others reported stone blocks, heavy and angular, fouling nets and forcing boats to cut their gear free. While no formal archaeological study has traced these particular finds to definitive settlements, the anecdotes cluster around regions once thought to have been shorelines before the flood. Fringe stories flourish in this space. Some tales describe carved beams with patterns, or nets snagging on what felt like staircases rising from the seabed. A few even insist on inscriptions glimpsed before the waterlogged wood crumbled to pieces in the sun. Such accounts are impossible to verify. Objects rot, nets are cut, fishermen move on. Yet they feed the idea that the Black Sea is not just an empty abyss, but a place where evidence occasionally brushes against the surface, then vanishes again. Scholars still debate how much weight to give these stories. On one hand, fishermen's testimony cannot be dismissed outright. People who spend lifetimes at sea often recognize what is ordinary and what is not. On the other hand, without physical artifacts preserved, the tales remain folklore. Are they genuine glimpses of submerged villages, or are they embellishments shaped by the human tendency to find wonder in the unknown? The line between oral tradition and data blurs, leaving us listening to voices across a fog of uncertainty. Yet these stories are worth lingering on. Picture a dawn on the Black Sea. The water is flat, the horizon silver. Fishermen work in silence, until suddenly a net strains, heavier than usual. They pull together, expecting sturgeon or tuna. But when the net rises, tangled among the fish is a beam of oak, dark as iron, squared on all sides. The men haul it aboard, puzzled. One runs his hand along the surface, feeling grooves too regular to be random. For a moment, they stand in awe, and then, as the sun rises higher, practicality returns. The beam is tossed aside, left on the beach, where it decays to nothing. History brushed against their lives, then slipped away. In this way, the Fisherman's Hall becomes a metaphor for our search. So often, evidence emerges in fleeting fragments, insufficient to confirm but too peculiar to ignore. Each timber, each odd stone, is a reminder that the sea occasionally lifts its veil only to drop it again. For those who make their living from its depths, such moments are not academic. They are interruptions in routine, reminders that the Black Sea holds more than fish. And so, while scientists deploy sonar and submersibles, we should not overlook the fishermen. Their stories, whether exaggerated or plain, are part of the archive. They are the human link between surface and seabed, between livelihood and legend. Each haul is not just a day's work, it is a chance, however slim, that the sea will surrender another fragment of its drowned past. Eyes of the machines. As the 20th century drew to a close, the search for the Black Sea's secrets shifted from folklore to technology. Where fishermen's nets offered chance encounters with timbers and stones, machines provided systematic vision. Sonar scans, remote-operated vehicles, and underwater cameras began to peel back the surface, turning rumour into imagery. For the first time, the sea could be seen with mechanical eyes, and what they revealed was both haunting and astonishing. The factual record begins with expeditions in the late 1990s, when marine archaeologists like Robert Ballard, the same explorer who discovered the Titanic, turned their attention to the Black Sea. Using side-scan sonar, his team mapped sections of the seabed, detecting anomalies that suggested human structures. Subsequent dives with remotely operated vehicles, ROVs, uncovered preserved wooden remains, hulls of ancient ships lying intact in the anoxic deep, where oxygen does not reach to fuel decay. These discoveries proved the Black Sea's unique role as a time capsule, preserving organic material that would rot anywhere else. At the fringe of these findings are the more tantalizing claims. Sonar sweeps sometimes capture rectangular shapes or patterns that seem too regular to be natural. To enthusiasts, these are lost houses or temples. Skeptics, however, caution that sonar can deceive. Mud, rocks, and geological ridges often mimic the appearance of man-made structures. Still, the allure persists. Grainy images interpreted as walls or foundations hint at villages resting quietly beneath layers of silt. Scholars still debate how much weight these sonar patterns deserve. Some argue that, combined with oral traditions and scattered artifacts, they build a circumstantial case for submerged settlements. Others insist we cannot leap from shapes on a screen to the conclusion of civilization. Until divers physically examine such sites, the evidence remains ambiguous, hovering between science and speculation. Yet the technology itself has transformed our relationship with the Black Sea. Imagine watching a live feed from an ROV descending into the depths. The camera light cuts through blackness, illuminating a seabed undisturbed for millennia. Out of the gloom emerges a wooden ship, its mast still standing, its planks tight as the day it sank. Around it, amphorae rest on the sand, as if their owner might return at any moment. The silence is complete, broken only by the hum of the machine. These are not just artifacts, they are windows into frozen moments of history. The same technology also helps reconstruct landscapes. Sediment cores taken from the seabed reveal layers of transition, from freshwater clays to salty marine deposits, pinpointing when the flood occurred. Sonar maps show drowned river channels winding beneath the sea, ghostly reminders of valleys where people once lived. Each data point is another brushstroke in the portrait of a vanished world. In this way, the Black Sea becomes both laboratory and library. Its oxygen-starved depths are the shelves, and the machines are the readers, pulling volumes from darkness. The fishermen's tales gave us the first hints, but it is sonar and ROVs that allow us to confirm, challenge, or reimagine those stories. What they find may not always match the myths, but it is no less remarkable. Entire landscapes, perfectly preserved, waiting for us to interpret them. And so, the machines continue to descend, their lights cut through silence, their sensors trace the contours of valleys long drowned. With every expedition, the boundary between folklore and fact shifts. The Black Sea is no longer just a place of rumour, it is a field of discovery, opened by the unblinking eyes of machines. The Black Sea turned briny. Once upon a time, the Black Sea was not black at all, not in the sense we know it today. It was a freshwater lake, nourished by rivers pouring from the north and west, home to fish and reeds, surrounded by fertile plains where villages thrived. Then came the breach. Salt water surged in, and with it, a profound transformation. What had been a freshwater world became briny, its ecosystem forever altered. In a matter of years, perhaps decades, the entire character of the basin changed. The mainstream evidence is clear. Sediment cores drilled from the seabed reveal a striking shift in biology. Below a certain depth, the remains of freshwater species dominate: snails, clams, and mollusks that lived in rivers and lakes. Above that line, new species appear: oysters and other saltwater creatures that could only have come from the Mediterranean. Radiocarbon dating places this transition around 5600 BCE, aligning with the theory of the catastrophic flood. The Black Sea's transformation from lake to sea is one of the clearest geological signals of prehistory. Yet in the fringes of interpretation, some go further. They imagine that this sudden influx of salt water not only destroyed local ecosystems, but also left strange toxic qualities in the water, qualities that gave rise to its ominous name. Some even whisper of ancient sailors who avoided its depths, fearing its lifeless blackness, while the sea's name, black, may more likely stem from navigational colour coding in ancient Turkic languages. The notion of a cursed or haunted sea has clung to its reputation for centuries. Scholars still debate how abrupt the ecological transformation was. Did freshwater species vanish overnight, their habitats drowned by saline water pouring in? Or did some linger in brackish margins for centuries, slowly fading as the sea stabilized into its modern form? The pace of this transition is vital to understanding whether local human communities were shocked by sudden scarcity of familiar resources, or whether they adapted gradually, shifting to saltwater fish and new strategies. The impact on human life would have been immense. For villagers who had relied on freshwater fish like carp or pike, the shift meant uncertainty. Nets, once heavy with familiar catches, may have grown empty. Fields irrigated with river water turned brackish, soils poisoned by creeping salinity. The very environment they depended upon betrayed them, reshaped by forces beyond their control. To some, this may have felt like divine punishment. To others, like the ending of an age. The Black Sea today still bears the legacy of that transformation. Beneath about 150 meters, its waters are almost entirely devoid of oxygen, saturated instead with hydrogen sulfide. This creates a stark division, a living, oxygen-rich layer above and a silent, deadly world below. Ships lost in those depths lie preserved, their timbers untouched by decay. It is as if the sea holds its breath, keeping its secrets locked away in a briny vault. To picture the shift is to imagine watching a lake turn hostile. At first, reeds sway, and freshwater fish dart in shallows. Then, slowly, the water thickens, salt replacing sweetness. Creatures die, drift to the bottom, and are replaced by others unfamiliar. The taste of the air changes, harsher, sharper. For the people living there, it was not only their homes but their very food supply transformed, demanding choices: stay and adapt, or leave and seek new lands. The Black Sea turned briny, and with that shift, a chapter of human and natural history closed. The freshwater lake was gone, replaced by a sea that was richer in some ways, crueler in others, and destined to carry within its depths both memory and myth. Lives interrupted. Before the deluge, life along the ancient Black Sea was steady, rhythmic, and deeply rooted in cycles of land and water. Families farmed the fertile plains, herded their animals, and cast nets into rivers rich with fish. Theirs was a world of continuity, where generations built upon the labour of those before them. And then, in what may have been weeks or months, Everything they had known was disrupted. Fields vanished beneath rising waves, homes were abandoned, and lives, quiet and ordinary, were interrupted in ways beyond imagining. Archaeological finds allow us to reconstruct fragments of this existence. In settlements near the basin, archaeologists uncover cereal grains of emmer wheat and barley, bones of domesticated cattle, sheep and goats, and fishing tools fashioned from bone and stone. These communities were among the pioneers of agriculture in southeastern Europe, blending farming with hunting and fishing. Their houses were rectangular, built from wood and clay, with central hearths for warmth and cooking. It was a life of modest prosperity, sustained by the balance between land and water. And then came the rupture. The mainstream theory suggests that when the flood poured in around 5600 BCE, thousands of square kilometers of farmland were swallowed. Entire villages disappeared beneath advancing waves. For those who lived at the water's edge, there would have been little time to respond. Imagine tending goats one morning and hearing a distant roar by evening, the waterline creeping higher each day. The flood did not simply erase landscapes, it fractured lifeways, scattering families and uprooting traditions. In the realm of fringe interpretation, some imagine that this disruption was not just loss, but transformation. They argue that survivors carried their knowledge outward, seeding the development of new farming communities across Europe and the Near East. The interruption of lives at the Black Sea, in this vision, was the catalyst for cultural spread on a grand scale. Though evidence is thin, the theory persists that the flood's refugees became agents of change, spreading languages, myths, and agricultural practices to distant lands. Scholars still debate the scale of this displacement. Was it tens of thousands of people forced to flee, carrying livestock and seeds into unfamiliar regions? Or was it smaller, a handful of valleys drowned while others adapted? The difference matters, for it shapes whether we see the flood as a localized tragedy or a continental turning point. The archaeology suggests both: evidence of abandoned settlements in some areas, continued occupation in others. The full story remains elusive. To bring it closer, imagine a single family on the eve of disruption. A father sharpens his stone axe while his daughter weaves reeds into a basket. The mother tends to bread baking on hot stones. Then comes the shout of a neighbour. The water is rising again, faster now. They scramble to salvage what they can: tools, food, a figurine of a household deity, and leave their hearth behind. Perhaps they move to higher ground and survive. Perhaps the waters catch them before they can. Either way, their life, once ordinary, has been forever broken. The phrase "lives interrupted" is deceptively gentle. In truth, it was upheaval, displacement, and grief. Yet within that grief was resilience. Some families rebuilt on new shores, adapting to changed waters. Others moved farther afield, carrying fragments of memory and myth. The Black Sea flood was not just the drowning of a landscape, it was the fracturing of continuity, the end of one rhythm of life and the uncertain beginning of another. Migrations begin. When the waters rose and the fertile plains of the Black Sea vanished, the people who had once thrived there faced a stark choice: remain in shrinking pockets of habitable land or set out in search of new homes. For many, the flood was not only an ending but a beginning, a catalyst for movement. Out of tragedy, migrations began, reshaping the cultural map of Eurasia. Mainstream archaeology offers clues to these journeys. Around the 6th millennium BCE, just as the Black Sea flood is thought to have occurred, we see evidence of expanding farming cultures across Europe. From the Balkans into Central Europe, Neolithic communities spread, carrying with them wheat, barley, and domesticated animals. Similar movements appear in Anatolia and the Caucasus, suggesting that waves of migration radiated outward. While not all of this expansion can be tied directly to the Black Sea, the timing tempts scholars to connect the dots. Survivors of drowned valleys may have been among those who carried seeds, tools, and customs into new lands. Fringe theories take this further, arguing that the flood was the single great dispersal event of prehistory. In this vision, displaced Black Sea peoples became the ancestors of diverse cultures, spreading to Mesopotamia, inspiring flood myths there, moving westward into Europe carrying Proto-Indo-European languages, and even venturing toward the Aegean, planting the seeds of Greek myth. While most academics caution against such sweeping claims, the idea has a certain elegance. One disaster, many destinies. Scholars still debate how visible these migrations truly are in the archaeological record. Were they vast waves of people or gradual trickles over generations? Did the flood cause the dispersals or merely accelerate movements already underway as farming spread across the continent? Genetic studies add complexity. Traces of haired ancestry appear across Eurasia, but disentangling whether this stems from flood refugees or broader Neolithic expansion remains unresolved. To imagine these migrations is to conjure a caravan of humanity, trudging across new landscapes with everything they could carry. Men and women drove cattle along narrow river valleys. Children clutched clay figurines, reminders of hearths left behind. Dogs padded alongside, noses twitching at unfamiliar scents. Each step forward was both loss and hope, a turning away from drowned homes and toward uncertain futures. Some settled in valleys where the soil was good, others moved on again, restless, until they found safety. What did they carry besides tools and livestock? They carried language, stories, and ritual. Myths of the flood travelled in their memory, reshaped in every telling. Songs once sung on Black Sea shores were adapted to new rivers and hills. Techniques of farming and pottery spread with them, knitting once isolated communities into broader networks. The migrations were not merely physical, they were cultural, transmitting ways of life across vast distances. One can picture a village in the Balkans decades after the flood. A stranger arrives, speaking a dialect slightly different, carrying seed grain wrapped in cloth. He tells of water swallowing valleys, of homes lost beneath waves. The villagers listen with unease, then curiosity. Soon they adopt his seeds, his tools, perhaps even his words. His story becomes theirs, woven into the fabric of their identity. The Black Sea has vanished from sight, but its memory lingers in the very patterns of their daily lives. Migrations begin in sorrow, but they end in transformation. For the displaced people of the Black Sea, the flood was a breaking point, yet in their movement they carried the seeds, literal and cultural, of futures they could never have imagined. What was drowned in one place took root in another, ensuring that even in loss, continuity endured. The puzzle of Mycop. In the centuries after the Black Sea's transformation, new cultures emerged on its fringes, carrying whispers of older ways, yet experimenting with new brilliance. Among the most enigmatic is the Mycop culture, which flourished in the northern Caucasus during the late 4th millennium BCE. Its legacy sparkles with gold ornaments, elaborate burial mounds, and artifacts that seem far ahead of their time. To some, Mycop is a puzzle piece in the long aftermath of the flood, a culture whose roots may trace back to displaced peoples of the drowned valleys. Mainstream archaeology situates Mycop firmly in the Bronze Age. Excavations of kurgans, large burial mounds, reveal extraordinary finds. Golden bowls hammered with geometric motifs, finely crafted weapons, and textiles preserved in fragments. The Mycop chiefs buried within these tombs commanded not only wealth but also connections. Their artifacts show influences from Mesopotamia and Anatolia, suggesting trade networks that stretched across mountains and seas. In their grandeur, the Mycop stand out as one of the earliest high-status societies of the Caucasus. At the fringes of interpretation, however, some propose a deeper link. They argue that Mycop's sudden sophistication may have roots in survivors of the Black Sea flood, who carried with them advanced farming, metallurgical knowledge, or ritual practices. Could the gold-laden burials be echoes of an older ritual tradition, transplanted into new soil? Enthusiasts even imagine that Mycop was founded by a refugee elite, keeping alive memories of drowned sanctuaries beneath the sea. Though unproven, the notion lingers, part history, part legend. Scholars still debate Mycop's true origins. Were they an indigenous culture, developing brilliance on their own in the Caucasian foothills, or were they shaped by waves of migrants bringing new ideas from Anatolia, Mesopotamia, or perhaps the shores of the Black Sea? Genetic studies and artifact comparisons provide tantalizing but inconclusive clues. Some evidence points to external contacts, while other findings stress local innovation. The question remains open, the puzzle unsolved. To picture Mycop life is to imagine a society in transition. Farmers tended wheat and barley, herders drove cattle across mountain valleys, and artisans hammered gold into intricate designs. At night, fires flickered across the hills, illuminating burial mounds that loomed like sentinels. Rituals were performed with care, honouring ancestors whose spirits were thought to guard the land. In these moments, we glimpse continuity with older traditions, reverence for the dead, for cycles of life and renewal, that may stretch back to communities drowned centuries earlier. The Mycop puzzle matters because it hints at how trauma can seed brilliance. If even a fraction of their culture carried memories of the flood, then their golden ornaments and elaborate burials were not only displays of power, but also acts of preservation. Each mound was a statement: we endure, we create beauty, we bury our leaders not to forget, but to remember. And so, the Mycop stand as a shimmering thread in the tapestry of the Black Sea's legacy. Whether born of refugees or local innovation, they embody resilience and adaptation. Their artifacts, gleaming in museum cases today, remind us that out of disruption can come brilliance, and that beneath the waves of history lie puzzles we are still struggling to piece together, timbers in the dark. If the flood drowned villages and the centuries carried myths, then the Black Sea itself preserved something else entirely: ships. Beneath its surface, in the still, oxygen-starved depths, lie wooden timbers that elsewhere would have rotted away. Here they remain, sealed in silence, waiting like time capsules. These wrecks are not from the Neolithic flood, but from later ages of navigation, yet they remind us of a deeper truth, that the Black Sea has long been both barrier and bridge, crossed by mariners whose memory lingers in timbers resting in the dark. Mainstream discoveries confirm this astonishing preservation. In 2018, the Black Sea Maritime Archaeology Project announced the find of a 2,400-year-old Greek trading vessel lying intact at a depth of over 2 kilometers. Its mast stood upright, its rudder still in place, its hull preserved in extraordinary detail. Amphorae littered its interior, undisturbed since it sank. No other sea on Earth can boast such preservation. The Black Sea's anoxic depths are, in effect, a vault, keeping timbers frozen in time. On the fringe, some interpret these shipwrecks as more than evidence of trade. They see them as clues that ancient mariners ventured far earlier, perhaps even during or just after the flood. Could survivors have taken to the water, building boats to flee the rising tide? If so, might wrecks from the 6th millennium BCE still rest in the depths, waiting to be discovered? No such vessel has yet been found, but the idea persists, tantalizing in its possibility. Scholars still debate whether boat technology at the time of the Black Sea flood was advanced enough for such escape. Some argue that dugout canoes and simple rafts would have been sufficient for short journeys but inadequate for mass migrations. Others point to early evidence of seafaring in the Mediterranean, such as obsidian-traded Fee and Rom Island sources thousands of years earlier, as proof that watercraft existed and were capable of real journeys. The question remains unresolved. Did the flood drive people to the sea, or did they retreat inland, abandoning water altogether? The wrecks themselves tell quieter stories. Imagine descending with an ROV, its light cutting through the blackness. Out of the gloom emerges a ship, its planks dark but unbroken. Amphorae lie nestled in sand, still sealed with resin. A mast rises like a skeletal tree, untouched by worms or rot. For a moment, it feels less like discovery and more like trespassing, entering a place where time has stopped, where the crew might return at any moment to resume their voyage. Such timbers remind us that the Black Sea was never only a site of loss. It was also a highway of memory, connecting Greeks, Scythians, Byzantines, and countless others who sailed its waters. The ships preserved in its depths are not only artifacts, but also voices. They whisper of journeys, of trade, of risk and ambition. They show us that long after the flood, the sea continued to shape human history, not only by taking, but by connecting. The timbers in the dark stand as metaphors too. They are fragments of the human story, carried across time not by writing or myth, but by wood and rope, by the simple determination to move across water. Perhaps, somewhere deeper still, lie older timbers, canoes or rafts from those first days of flood. If ever found, they would be among the most precious relics of our past, proof that even in the face of catastrophe, humanity took to the water, trusting fragile vessels to carry them towards survival. Diving into nothingness. If the Black Sea tempts us with myths of drowned valleys and perfectly preserved wrecks, it also confronts us with frustration. For every artifact retrieved, there are miles upon miles of emptiness. Archaeologists speak of the difficulty with a mixture of awe and despair. Diving here often means descending into black water, mud and silence, returning with little more than silt in sample jars. It is the archaeology of absence, where discovery is rare and patience is tested to the limit. The mainstream reality is clear. Excavating underwater sites is already daunting in shallow seas, but in the Black Sea the challenge multiplies. Visibility is often poor, currents treacherous, and the anoxic layer begins just beneath the photic zone, plunging divers into total darkness. Traditional diving cannot reach the greatest depths, where preservation is most remarkable. Machines must take over, mapping the seabed with sonar and collecting samples with robotic arms. Each expedition costs millions, and results may be measured not in treasures recovered but in data points, a core of sediment, a blurry sonar map, a faint hint of a riverbed. On the fringe, these challenges have sparked rumours. Some claim that archaeologists have already found proof of ancient cities, walls, streets, even temples, but suppress the information, unwilling to share with the wider world. Others imagine that governments guard the secrets of the Black Sea, keeping knowledge of its true past hidden. There is no credible evidence for such claims, yet their persistence reflects the frustration of absence. When the sea gives so little, imaginations rush to fill the void. Scholars still debate whether the lack of material evidence proves caution is warranted, or whether we are simply searching in the wrong places. Are the drowned villages buried too deeply in silt to detect? Have we underestimated how fragile their remains might be after millennia underwater? Or was the flood's human toll smaller than imagined, leaving fewer traces to find? The absence itself becomes part of the debate, a silence that shapes interpretation as much as presence would. To imagine the reality of these dives, picture a research vessel bobbing on the Black Sea. Scientists lower an ROV, and its cameras descend into utter blackness. At first, the feed shows only drifting particles, like snow in an endless night. The machine crawls forward, its light illuminating mud, scattered shells, nothing more. Hours pass. The ship's crew waits, eyes glued to the screen, but the seabed remains stubbornly bare. Then, perhaps, the faint outline of a wooden plank appears, one small reward for days of waiting. It is not dramatic, yet for the team, it is everything. This absence can be maddening. We long for dramatic finds, temples beneath the sea, villages frozen in time. But archaeology often works in negatives, in absences that refine questions rather than answer them. Each empty dive confirms that the sea keeps its secrets well, that its silence is as much a feature of history as its discoveries. The archaeology of absence is still archaeology, a reminder that the past cannot always be summoned at will. And so, we dive into nothingness again and again, because even in silence, meaning can be found. Every blank sonar scan teaches us where not to look. Every sediment core tells a story of ecological change. And every rare discovery, the timber of a ship, the shard of a pot, is precious precisely because it emerges from a sea of emptiness. In the Black Sea, patience is not a virtue but a necessity, for its secrets will not be hurried. The Atlantis temptation. Wherever a sea conceals a mystery, the ghost of Atlantis is never far behind. The Black Sea, with its drowned valleys, preserved timbers, and whispered flood myths, has drawn more than its share of seekers, convinced that Plato's lost island lies beneath its waves. For some, the temptation is irresistible, to connect the myth of Atlantis not to the Atlantic Ocean, but to the Black Sea flood, casting its drowned plains as the stage for humanity's most enduring legend of loss. The mainstream consensus is more restrained. Most scholars treat Atlantis as a philosophical allegory invented by Plato to critique hubris and power. Yet the resonance of the tale, the sudden destruction of an advanced society swallowed by the sea, rings eerily similar to what geology suggests may have happened here around 5600 BCE. The flood of the Black Sea, if catastrophic enough, would have drowned entire communities, leaving behind memories that could morph into grander myths. In this sense, the Atlantis story, though not literal, finds a haunting echo. Fringe interpretations, however, go much further. Some authors argue that sonar images of rectangular shapes in the Black Sea prove the existence of submerged cities, Atlantis itself or something very much like it. Others claim that divers have glimpsed stone walls or inscriptions before currents swept them away. Still others insist that the incredible preservation conditions must be hiding whole complexes of temples and palaces awaiting discovery. These ideas have fueled documentaries, books, and endless speculation, blurring the line between science and fantasy. Scholars still debate whether entertaining the Atlantis connection is useful or distracting. On one hand, it draws public attention to genuine research on the Black Sea flood. On the other, it risks overshadowing the real achievements of Neolithic communities, with fantasies of golden cities and impossible technologies. Were the Black Sea's lost peoples advanced enough to merit comparison with Atlantis, or were they simply farmers and herders, living ordinary lives that ended in extraordinary disaster? The answer may lie in how we value the past. Do we seek marvels, or do we honour reality? Imagine, though, standing on the shore as the waters rose. To those who fled, leaving behind fields, shrines, and homes, the loss would have felt every bit as monumental as the sinking of Atlantis. Their world was their world, no less important for being made of clay and timber rather than marble and bronze. For them, the flood was the end of everything, the collapse of an entire way of life. If their descendants later clothed that memory in grandeur, casting their drowned homeland as a mythical Atlantis, who can fault them? Myth magnifies grief into legend. The Atlantis temptation reminds us of our hunger for lost utopias, for proof that somewhere long ago, humans achieved greatness only to lose it. But perhaps the true power of the Black Sea lies in its humbler truths, in clay pots and charred seeds, in timber beams preserved by salt. These fragments, modest though they seem, tell a story just as compelling, a story of resilience, migration, and survival. The real Atlantis, if we must call it that, was not a glittering city, but a drowned countryside where ordinary people lived extraordinary lives. Still, the temptation persists. Every sonar blip, every diver's tale, is weighed against the dream of a lost civilization waiting in the dark. And perhaps that dream has its place. For without imagination, without the lure of Atlantis, many eyes might never have turned to the Black Sea at all. Science still descends. Despite decades of speculation and the flood of myths surrounding the Black Sea, the story is far from finished. Each year, teams of scientists continue to launch expeditions, lowering machines into the depths, sampling sediments, and scanning for signs of landscapes long gone. The sea remains a frontier of research, a place where the line between knowledge and mystery is constantly redrawn. Science, like a patient diver, still descends. The factual record is rich. Projects like the Black Sea Maritime Archaeology Project, MAP, have mapped hundreds of square kilometers of seabed, discovering more than 60 shipwrecks spanning 2 millennia of history. Some of these vessels are astonishingly preserved. Byzantine traders with masts upright, Ottoman galleys with planks intact. Radiocarbon dating of shells and sediments continues to refine the timeline of the flood, narrowing the window of when freshwater species vanished and saltwater ones appeared. These are the anchors of science, the careful measurements that turn myth into history. On the fringes, however, new claims emerge with each season. Some enthusiasts argue that sonar images hint at entire settlements, grids of shapes resembling streets, or platforms that might be temples. Others insist that deeper exploration will inevitably reveal prehistoric boats used by flood refugees. While such claims often leap ahead of the evidence, they fuel public imagination and keep the Black Sea in the spotlight. The challenge for scientists is to separate genuine discoveries from hopeful illusions without losing sight of how compelling the mystery remains. Scholars still debate what the next breakthrough will look like. Will it be the recovery of a Neolithic dwelling buried in silt, complete with hearthstones and tools? Or will it be subtler, a core of sediment yielding pollen grains that prove crops once grew where waves now roll? The tension between dramatic discovery and incremental science defines this field. Some argue we should temper expectations, focusing on ecological reconstruction rather than lost civilizations. Others hold that patience will eventually yield more spectacular finds, hidden in the briny dark. To glimpse the present reality, imagine a research vessel at sea. On deck, scientists in bright jackets cluster around a monitor as an ROV sinks through the black water. Its camera reveals nothing but drifting particles until suddenly a wooden hull comes into view. Gasps ripple across the deck. The ship has been unseen since antiquity, and yet it rests before them now, as if time itself had been paused. The excitement is palpable, not only because of the ship, but because each find suggests that much more lies hidden. This ongoing work reminds us that science is not static. It is a process of descent, both literal and metaphorical. Each dive, each scan adds another layer to our understanding of the Black Sea's past. And yet, for every answer, more questions arise. How many villages were truly drowned? How many families displaced? How far did their migrations reach? The sea guards its answers closely, revealing them only to those willing to wait. In this way, the Black Sea becomes a mirror of our own curiosity. We descend into its depths, not only to find timbers and pots, but to confront the enduring human desire to know where we came from and how we survived catastrophe. Science still descends, and it will continue to descend as long as the waves conceal echoes of a world we have not yet fully heard. Lessons of the drowned past. The story of the Black Sea is not merely one of loss. It is a story of transformation, of how landscapes and people change together, and of how memory outlives even the most devastating of floods. Beneath its still waters lies a drowned world, fields, hearths, and perhaps shrines, but above it lives the legacy of those who once called its shores home. Their story, though fragmented, offers us lessons about resilience, migration, and the power of myth. The mainstream evidence anchors us in reality. Around 5600 BCE, the basin shifted from freshwater lake to saltwater sea, drowning fertile plains and forcing communities to adapt or flee. Archaeological traces, pottery, tools, and seeds reveal lives interrupted but not erased. Genetic and cultural echoes of those people spread outward, blending into the tapestry of Europe, Anatolia, and beyond. Their survival ensured that even though their valleys were lost, their knowledge and traditions endured. On the fringes of interpretation, the Black Sea continues to attract visions of grandeur, theories of Atlantis beneath its depths, of temples preserved in silt, of flood survivors seeding the roots of Indo-European languages. Such claims, though often unproven, highlight our fascination with the possibility that one place could hold the key to so much of human history. They remind us that imagination, too, is part of how we engage with the past. Scholars still debate whether the Black Sea flood was sudden catastrophe or gradual encroachment, whether it displaced multitudes or merely reshaped a few valleys. Yet even amid disagreement, one truth is shared. The event mattered. It altered the ecology, reconfigured settlement patterns, and perhaps shaped myths that still echo today. The details may be uncertain, but the significance is undeniable. The lessons reach beyond archaeology. The Black Sea reminds us that human beings have always lived in fragile balance with the environment. When the waters rose, people adapted, migrated, and reimagined their worlds. Today, as we face our own rising seas and shifting climates, the story resonates anew. It tells us that while landscapes may change, resilience and creativity endure. Picture the waves lapping against the shore today. Beneath them lie hearths gone cold, valleys silenced, and perhaps gods forgotten. Yet above them stand cities, ships, and communities that trace, however faintly, their lineage back to those who once fled the flood. The drowned past is not gone. It is present in our myths, in our migrations, and in the enduring human ability to survive change. The Black Sea is both graveyard and cradle, a resting place for a vanished world and a birthplace of new beginnings. Its lessons are not only about what was lost, but about what was carried forward, and how humanity, even in the face of overwhelming water, finds ways to endure. Conclusion. The Black Sea whispers of a world that vanished, yet was never entirely forgotten. Beneath its briny surface lie fragments of hearths, timbers, and myths, remnants of a people who lived, loved, and lost to the rising tide. From these fragments, we glimpse not only catastrophe, but also continuity. Migrations that spread crops and languages, myths that grew into sacred texts, resilience that carried families into new landscapes. The story is unfinished. Science still descends, uncovering wrecks and sediments, chasing the outlines of valleys long drowned. Myths still circulate, imagining Atlantean cities and sacred shrines below. And we, listening, still wonder what truly lies beneath those quiet waves. In the end, the lesson of the Black Sea is not only about the past, it is about us. Change comes, sometimes suddenly, sometimes slowly. Landscapes shift, seas rise, lives are interrupted. But from loss can come survival, migration, and even brilliance. The drowned civilization beneath the Black Sea is not gone, it speaks still, reminding us that resilience is the most enduring story of all.